These are they're enormous. They're the size of a small tractor trailer, and there's two of them, and they turned them on just to make sure they worked, which is a good thing too, and then they also de-energized from the grid briefly. They shut off the incoming power from the grid, and they turned the diesels on just to make sure the diesels were both working. Now, I've been at plants when I was at Millstone 1 back in the 70s, and we had a hurricane, and the hurricane knocked out the switchyard, and we went and hit the button for the diesels, and one of the diesels didn't start up. So we were down to just one diesel generator. So they wanted to make sure the diesels worked. After that, they shut them back off, and they went back onto the grid. So they hope that the next time they hit the start button on the diesels, they start again. But it was really a confirmation that they had a fallback if they lost the off-site power.
Can you describe for our listeners the chain of contingency from the external power grid that is normally used to maintain cooling at the reactor itself as well as the spent fuel? And you might also mention where there is fuel in the reactor as well as in the spent fuel pool. But the chain of contingency from the external power to the diesel generators and to the batteries, and what is the possible lifespan of each of those components?
It's a very short chain. There's two lines coming in from off-site. They usually come in from somewhat different directions. In the event a tornado comes through or something, the goal is not to lose both off-site lines. In the event you do lose both off-site lines, and that happens frequently, there's two diesel generators, either one of which can run the plant. So, when you hit the start button, if one of them doesn't start, you still have enough power to run the plant with the one remaining diesel. Now, onto the batteries. The batteries are there in case the other diesel doesn't start. So if you've lost the off-site power and neither diesel starts, you have about 4 hours of battery power to frantically get one of those other diesels to start. So the batteries are designed to tide you over, to give you enough time to get at least one of the diesels running in the event you've lost everything.
One of the events that has occurred in recent weeks has been the release of sewage from the nuclear power plant. And returning to the June 27th Nuclear Regulatory Commission event notice, this also from Fort Calhoun. Off-site notification due to petroleum release to the Missouri River. At approximately 01:25 Central Daylight Time, the Aqua Dam providing enhanced flood protection at Fort Calhoun Station Unit 1 failed. This resulted in approximately 100 gallons of petroleum being released into the river after a protective barrier was breached and many fuel containers were washed out to the river. The fuel and or oil containers were staged around the facility to supply fuel for pumps which remove water within the flood containment barriers. The spill was reported to the state of Nebraska at 10:45 a.m. Central Daylight Time on the 26th of June, 2011. This suggests, Arnie, that there are points of significance and vulnerability outside of the actual reactor and containment building.
There were gas-fired pumps around on the premises because the Aqua Dam is not perfect and it leaks. Water comes under it and it leaks. So they had these gas-fired pumps placed around the premises to pump whatever was leaking in. But the bigger question is there something other than the containment and the auxiliary building that needs to be protected? And there's actually two things. The first is the switchyard, because you'd prefer not to lose off-site power. But the second is a little building right near the water, and it's called the intake structure. That draws in river water that cools the nuclear reactor and cools the spent fuel pool, even as we're speaking. So it's critical that inside that building that it stay dry. Now they found in the last couple of weeks, as the water levels come up, they found holes in the concrete that they weren't aware of, and they have plugged them to keep that building dry. If that building melts, if that building gets water in it, and those emergency service water pumps fail, then you've got a case where you're going to cause fuel damage. Now, what that means is that this happened at Fukushima. When the tidal wave came in, when the tsunami came into Fukushima, the first thing that was destroyed was the emergency service water pumps. And we call that the ultimate heat sink. If you can't dump the heat from the nuclear core, you're going to eventually have fuel damage. So that same thing could happen at Fort Calhoun. I almost think we're looking at the two wrong structures. You know, we're looking at this massive auxiliary building and the massive containment. But the little building next door, that there used to be a river there. Now it's so flooded it's hard to see where the river edge was. That's the intake structure, and that's probably the most vulnerable. So it's really important that the emergency service water pumps continue to stay dry, and I believe that's one of their main concerns.
Continuing on this hydrological theme, one of the curious things is the variability of the river height because of the overloading of upstream structures of dams because of a heavy snow that is now beginning to melt in the Dakotas and points north, and because of the rainy season that is taking place in the midwestern part of the United States. The levees that are placed alongside the river tend, if I am not misunderstanding, tend to confine the height of the river proper to the height of the lowest levee that breaks, and quite a few of them have broken in recent days. And yet there are still surges that are able to come from dam releases, or as you have expressed concern in the past about the potential for a broken dam. Now, can you explain how water is a hazard even if it does not raise the level of the river? Does it seep in other ways? How does water really work insidiously in regard to the stability of a nuclear plant?
Yeah, I have a couple of major concerns about that. Now this site now is completely submerged, and it's obviously mud. And I'm concerned about two things. There's an enormous amount of safety-related pipes and safety-related electrical wires that are now not only underground, but underground surrounded by mud and water. That, for instance, those emergency service water pumps I mentioned in the intake structure get their power from an underground line that runs between the plant and that building. So one hopes that the line does not get waterlogged, the electric wire does not get waterlogged, because that would shut the pumps down. The second thing is that the building is going to settle after the flood leaves, and just like any structure that's sitting in a wet, swampy environment. And my concern is the structural analysis and the seismic analysis. These things are made to be earthquake-proof. I hope that there'll be a new seismic and structural analysis done just to make sure that the flood and the soggy earth beneath the plant haven't changed how the plant will respond to an earthquake.
This is 5 o'clock Shadow on the Pacifica Radio Network, originating from station WBAI. I'm Robert Knight in New York, and that is Arnie Gundersen of Fairwinds Associates. And Arnie, we've taken time to look at the details of Fort Calhoun, but that's only one of two Nebraska nuclear power plants on the Missouri River. Let's turn now to the southernmost of the two, of the Cooper Station.
I'm more concerned about the Cooper Station than I am about the Fort Calhoun Station. Cooper is identical to Fukushima in that it's a boiling water reactor and a Mark I design. But more importantly, it's continuing to run. Even though the flood has gotten to the point where it's very near the power plant, the people at Cooper have not shut the reactor down. Whereas recall that the people at Fort Calhoun did. The NRC really has no enforcement ability to say you must shut that